It was late at night when the homeowner noticed something unusual. A soft thud against the front door broke the silence of the street. At first they thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch brushing against the frame. But when they opened the door, they saw it. A single letter taped firmly to the wood. The paper carried the official HOA logo, bold and cold under the dim porch light. Normally, these letters were predictable. Fines about grass height, complaints about paint colors, warnings about trash cans left outside. But this one was different. The envelope had no details, no explanation, just one short, sharp message typed in black ink. Stop asking questions, or else. The homeowner's hand shook as they held the note. The words felt heavier than the paper itself. It wasn't a simple rule notice. It was a threat. Behind them, the porch light flickered once, then steadied. A shadow moved across the street. The faint outline of someone walking away, slow and deliberate, almost daring to be noticed. The homeowner's heart pounded. Who had left the note, and why? The neighborhood was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, the kind that carried secrets. The air itself felt heavy, as if the houses and manicured lawns were hiding something. They looked around, hoping to catch another glimpse of the figure. Nothing. Just the perfect, polished street that always seemed too quiet, too controlled. But inside, panic and curiosity mixed together. This wasn't just about grass or mailboxes anymore. This was about something deeper, something the HOA didn't want anyone to find out. The homeowner closed the door, but kept the letter clutched tightly in their hand. Their mind raced back to the last few weeks. The strange looks from board members at the last meeting, the way neighbors quickly changed the subject when certainty turned. Topics came up. The whispers about money, about secret decisions, about people who caused trouble, suddenly getting hit with endless fines. Now it all made sense. Someone had noticed their questions, and now someone wanted them to stop. But fear wasn't the only feeling rising inside. Anger came next. Why should they be silent? Why should anyone in this neighborhood be afraid of the very people who claim to protect property values? The letter was supposed to scare them. Instead, it pushed them forward. The homeowner walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just slightly. The street looked calm, but their instinct said otherwise. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting to see what they would do next. They knew one thing for certain. If the HOA was willing to send threats, then the secret they were hiding had to be big. Bigger than fake fines. Bigger than rules about fences and flower beds. And now, the homeowner wasn't just curious. They were determined. The camera lingers on the trembling hand holding the note, the words in sharp focus. Stop asking questions, or else. The porch light hums above. The silence stretches, and the question hangs in the air. What is the HOA hiding, and how far will they go to keep it buried? The letter on the door was not the first sign of trouble. In fact, it had all started weeks earlier with something that seemed almost laughable. The first fine came in the mail, a crisp white envelope with the HOA seal. Inside, the notice claimed that the homeowner's grass was too green. Too green? How could anyone be punished for taking care of their yard? At the time, they shook their head and laughed. It had to be a mistake, a silly error in paperwork. But a few days later, another letter arrived. This one said the mailbox was too shiny. The homeowner stood on the porch staring at the polished black mailbox, wondering how its shine could possibly offend anyone. Again, they laughed. Maybe the HOA was just bored. Yet the letters kept coming. One week it was the garden hose being too visible. Another time it was the trash can being 2 inches off the driveway line. Each notice came with a fine attached, small enough to seem petty, but frequent enough to feel deliberate. At first, the homeowner tried to brush it off. They joked about it with friends and neighbors. "Guess my crime is watering the lawn too well," they'd say with a smile. But behind the humor, a quiet unease began to grow. Because the fines weren't just random, they were targeted. The timing was strange too. They had only recently started asking questions at HOA meetings. Simple questions like, "Where does our money go?" and "Why don't we see the financial reports?" Questions the board always seemed too busy to answer. And now the letters had shifted. They were no longer silly or harmless. One night, the homeowner found a notice slipped under the door. It wasn't about grass or mailboxes. This one had no fine attached, just a single sentence written in sharp black ink. "Stop making trouble." The words sent a chill through the air. This was no longer about rules. This was personal. The end. Next week, another envelope came. Inside was a violation form, but the boxes weren't filled in. Instead, scrawled across the paper in thick handwriting were the words, "We warned you." The laughter was gone now. The homeowner sat at the kitchen table staring at the notes spread out before them. Each one felt less like an HOA notice and more like a message meant to silence. This wasn't rule enforcement. This was intimidation. They thought about the neighbors who never spoke up, the ones who quietly paid every fine and avoided board meetings. Maybe they knew something. Maybe they had seen this before. The petty fines were just the beginning. The real message was clear. Stop asking questions, stop digging, or face what comes next. And for the first time, the homeowner realized the HOA wasn't just a group of rule enforcers. They were acting like something far more dangerous. Something with secrets worth hiding. The threats should have been enough to make the homeowner stop. That was, after all, the goal of the letters. But instead of backing down, the unease inside them turned into determination. If the HOA wanted silence, there had to be a reason. And now, they needed to know what that reason was. It started small. The homeowner began attending every HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back and listening. On the surface, the board members looked professional. Polished clothes, calm voices, polite smiles. But beneath that polished image, something was off. The meetings never lasted long. Questions from residents were brushed aside, often with vague answers. "We'll get back to you on that," the president would say, moving quickly to the next item on the agenda. When someone pressed harder, they were cut off with a firm, "That's not relevant." And one thing stood out more than anything else: the financial reports. Month after month, the board refused to share them. Whenever someone asked to see where the HOA dues were going, the answer was always the same. "Those records are not available at this time." Not available? For months? That didn't make sense. Suspicion grew, and the homeowner decided to look closer. They began talking to neighbors, carefully and quietly. Many were reluctant, their eyes darting around as if afraid someone might hear. But every so often, a small piece of truth slipped through the silence. One older resident whispered late one evening, "They don't want anyone to see the books. Too much money missing." Then she closed her door quickly, as if she had said too much. Another neighbor admitted that the HOA often announced meetings at the very last second, sometimes only hours before. "They don't want people to show up," he muttered. "They want control." The more the homeowner listened, the more the puzzle pieces began to form. Strange receipts appeared, are read in the community's shared files, invoices for landscaping that was never done, repairs to common areas that had never been touched. Thousands of dollars gone, yet the park still sat broken, the pool still closed, the sidewalks still cracked. One night, while scrolling through old documents on their laptop, the homeowner noticed something else. A contractor's bill signed by a board member. Not by the company, by the board member themselves. That was not just suspicious. That was a red flag. The whispers of missing funds were no longer just rumors. The numbers didn't add up. The secrecy wasn't just arrogance, it was hiding something. And with every new clue, the homeowner felt the tension tighten around them. The HOA wasn't simply strict or unfair. They were protecting something big, something worth threatening a neighbor over. But the board had made one mistake. In trying to silence one person, they had sparked curiosity instead. And now, the homeowner was ready to dig deeper than ever before. The more the homeowner uncovered, the clearer it became. They couldn't do this alone. If the HOA was hiding something, others in the neighborhood had to know pieces of the truth. So one evening, they made a decision. They would go door to door. The first house was quiet, its blinds drawn tight. When the neighbor finally opened the door, their voice was low and nervous. The homeowner explained about the strange finds, the missing records, the late-night letters. For a moment, the neighbor looked like they wanted to say something, but then their eyes darted toward the street. "I can't talk about this," they whispered, and the door closed softly in the homeowner's face. At the next house, the reaction was the same. A shake of the head, a quick excuse. Fear lingered in the air, thick and heavy. It wasn't just silence. It was silence born out of worry. These people were scared of their own HOA. But not everyone stayed quiet. At one house, a young couple leaned close and admitted they too had been fined unfairly. "They said our curtains were the wrong color," the wife whispered. "We replaced them, but then they fined us again for something else. It never ends." Her husband added, "We don't fight it anymore. If you push back, they make your life harder." The pattern was becoming clearer. The board didn't just enforce rules, they used rules as weapons, and the neighbors knew it. House after house, the homeowner heard similar stories. Trash cans too visible, cars parked too close to the curb, flowers planted without approval. Small, meaningless violations. But behind each fine was a deeper message. Stay quiet. Obey. Don't ask questions. Finally, at the end of the street, one neighbor spoke with more courage than the rest. An older man, leaning on his cane, opened his door and listened carefully. His eyes narrowed as the homeowner explained everything. The affair, receipts, the hidden records, the threatening notes. When the homeowner finished, the man sighed heavily. Then he spoke in a low, firm voice. "They don't want you to know where the money goes." The words hit like a hammer. Simple, direct, and terrifying. The homeowner felt the weight of the truth settling in. This wasn't about grass, mailboxes, or even control. This was about money. Money that was disappearing. The neighbors may have been afraid, but together their stories painted a picture the HOA board could no longer hide. And with that picture came a new fire inside the homeowner. They weren't just asking questions anymore. Now they were chasing answers. The words of the older neighbor echoed in the homeowner's mind. "They don't want you to know where the money goes." That night, sitting at the kitchen table, the homeowner stared at the stack of letters again. Petty fines, empty threats, hidden meetings. It all circled back to one thing: money. If the HOA was hiding their financial records, then those records had to hold the truth. But the board wasn't making it easy. At every meeting, they brushed off requests. They claimed the files were being updated, or that the treasurer was out of town. It was excuse after excuse. Still, the homeowner didn't stop pushing. And after weeks of persistence, a small victory came. A sympathetic neighbor, one who had quietly worked with the HOA years before, slipped a manila envelope into the homeowner's hands. "Old copies," the neighbor whispered. "Don't say you got them from me." Inside were several financial statements from past years, stamped with the HOA's seal. At first glance, they looked official. But as the homeowner studied the numbers, something was wrong. Very wrong. Thousands of dollars were listed as maintenance, yet the sidewalks were still cracked. The community pool had been closed for 2 summers. The park swing still hung rusted and broken. Where had that money gone? One page stood out most of all. It showed a payment to a contractor, a large bill marked Repairs for Community Park. The problem was, no such repairs had ever happened. The park sat exactly as it had for years, untouched and falling apart. The homeowner's hands trembled as they flipped through more pages. The numbers didn't add up. Expenses were recorded but not explained. Payments went to companies no one in the neighborhood had ever heard of. Some amounts were suspiciously round, not detailed invoices, but large, neat sums that looked like money vanishing into thin air. It was the first big clue. The board wasn't just unfair. They weren't just threatening. They might be stealing. The thought sent a chill down the homeowner's spine. This wasn't petty corruption. This was organized, deliberate, and the fines, the threats, the silence. It was all part of keeping residents distracted and afraid, while money disappeared behind closed doors. The manila envelope sat heavy on the table. Proof. Not complete, but enough to expose cracks in the board's story. Enough to show the neighbors they weren't imagining things. The homeowner leaned back in the chair, staring at the pages spread out before them. The truth was there, hidden in plain numbers. But exposing it wouldn't be simple. The board wouldn't go down quietly. Still, one thought kept repeating in their mind. If they can take money from us and threaten us into silence, how much worse will it get if nobody fights back? And with that, the homeowner knew there was no turning back. The hunt for answers had turned into a mission. The HOA's secret was beginning to unravel. The moment the homeowner got their hands on those old financial statements, everything changed. At first, they thought the files gave them power, but instead, it painted a target on their back. The HOA board must have realized someone had been digging, because the pressure grew overnight. New letters appeared on the door almost every morning, not official notices with stamps or signatures, but scribbled warnings. Stop now. You're making a mistake. The handwriting was shaky, almost rushed, but the message was clear. They were being watched. And then came the fake violations. One day, the homeowner returned home to find a notice taped to the door claiming their car was illegally parked. The problem? The car was in the driveway, exactly where it had been for years. The next day, another violation appeared, this time accusing them of having unapproved decorations in their yard. The so-called decorations? A single welcome mat by the front door. Every other day brought something new. It didn't matter how small or absurd. The board was flooding them with paperwork, trying to wear them down, trying to make them stop fighting. But the worst moment came late one night. The homeowner had installed a small security camera above their garage, more for peace of mind than anything else. They didn't expect it to actually catch something, but as they reviewed the footage the next morning, their stomach dropped. The grainy video showed a figure moving quietly across the yard just past midnight. The person wasn't a stranger. They were familiar. Too familiar. It was one of the HOA board members. The man crept toward the front door, something in his hand. He bent down, taped a piece of paper to the door, then glanced over his shoulder before hurrying away. The homeowner froze as they replayed the clip. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia the HOA bore. It was directly involved in the threats. Fear mixed with anger. If the board was bold enough to sneak onto their property in the middle of the night, what else were they capable of? How far would they go to silence anyone who challenged them? The pile of fake violations on the kitchen counter was proof of harassment. The late-night visit captured on camera was proof of intimidation. The homeowner was no longer just uncovering secrets. They were in a battle against people who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. And deep down, one thought refused to go away. If they're this desperate to scare me, then I must be close to the truth. The video from the security camera was the final push the homeowner needed. They were done being silent, done being afraid. It was time to bring the truth into the open. Over the next week, they gathered everything: the threatening letters, the stack of fake violations, the financial records that didn't add up, and the video clip of the board member sneaking across the yard at night. Each piece was like a puzzle, and when put together, it told a clear story. The HOA was hiding something big. So the homeowner called for a community meeting. Word spread quickly. By the time the night arrived, the room was packed. Neighbors filled every chair, some standing against the back wall. The HOA board sat stiffly at the front table, their faces tight and unreadable. The air was thick with tension. When the homeowner stood, the room fell silent. Heart pounding, they laid the first letter on the table. "This," they said, holding it up for everyone to see, "is what happens when you ask questions." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Next came the violations, absurd charges about grass, mailboxes, and welcome mats. The neighbors laughed at first, then frowned as the stack grew higher and higher. "This isn't rule enforcement," the homeowner said firmly. "This is harassment." The board shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, but the homeowner didn't stop. They opened the manila envelope and spread out the financial statements for everyone to see. "Look here," they said, pointing to the numbers. "Thousands of dollars marked for repairs that never happened. Money paid to contractors that no one has ever seen. Funds missing, year after year." The room grew louder. Some neighbors gasped, others shouted in anger. A woman in the back stood up, demanding, "Where is our money going?" Finally, the homeowner showed the last piece of proof, the video. On the screen, the board member could be seen sneaking into the yard, taping a note to the door under cover of night. Gasps filled the room. People turned to stare at the board. The silence that followed was heavier than any before. The board president tried to speak, his voice sharp. "This is taken out of context. This is not what it looks like." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Neighbors shouted over him, "We've had enough fines. Where's our money? You threatened us too." The board tried to shut the meeting down, banging on the table and calling for order, but it was too late. The truth was out. The homeowners had seen the evidence with their own eyes, and the board could no longer hide behind silence and excuses. The room, once controlled by fear, now belonged to the people. And for the first time, the HOA board looked cornered. The board sat frozen at the front of the room, their polished image crumbling under the weight of angry voices. What had once been a quiet community now buzzed with energy, with neighbors finally speaking out after years of silence. One by one, residents stood and demanded answers. Where is the money? Why are we being threatened? How long has this been happening? The questions came rapid and sharp, and the board had no real answers left to give. The crowd no longer feared them. Instead, they turned to the homeowner, the same person who only weeks ago had been laughed at for questioning petty fines. Now, that voice carried the room. The homeowner laid the facts down clearly, calmly, and firmly. The threats, the missing funds, the video proof. It was undeniable. For years, the HOA board had ruled through silence and intimidation. But now their secret was out, and the community wanted justice. Neighbors joined together, signing a petition right then and there for a full investigation. Some demanded the board step down immediately. Others called for law enforcement to be brought in. The tide had turned. The corrupt board members tried to argue, tried to defend themselves, but their words were drowned out by the voices of dozens of people who had finally found the courage to speak. The power they once held was gone. In the days that followed, change came quickly. The missing funds were investigated, The fake fines were thrown out, and the board members who had abused their authority were removed. For the first time in years, the community felt free. And at the center of it all stood the homeowner, once just another resident, now the voice of the people. They had faced threats, harassment, and fear, but in the end, they proved that no one could silence the truth. As the final scene closes, the homeowner's words ring out like a promise, strong and unforgetting.
The HOA tried to silence me, but instead I exposed their secret. And now they'll never control this neighborhood again.